For a century, the Archdiocese of Toronto's Catholic Charities and its army of volunteers has ministered to generations of people in need. Theirs is a labor of faith, hope, and love. Join us as we learn how, like a tiny mustard seed, Catholic Charities has grown from its humble beginnings into a super support network whose branches spread wide, providing shelter, service, and most importantly, hope to hundreds of thousands of people every year. Hello and welcome to Catholic Focus. I'm Cheridan Sanders. As the Archdiocese of Toronto's Catholic Charity celebrates its 100th anniversary, I'm pleased to welcome to our studios two guests, Michael Fullan, their Executive Director, and Jack Panozzo, the Program Manager of Social Justice and Advocacy. Thank you so much for being with us.
Nice to be here.
Catholic Charities comprises of 28 agencies. Tell me about your role in coordinating all of those agencies and just some of the scope of your outreach.
Well, from the beginning, Catholic Charities has had a responsibility to coordinate and bring like-minded Catholic social agencies together. So for 100 years we've done that. Archbishop McNeill started that in 1913, said there was a need to coordinate the efforts of the Catholic community. It seemed a bit unwieldy at that time. There were 6 agencies to begin. So we now have the 28, and the work remains the same, reaching out to those that are most vulnerable in our community, whether they be children with developmental disabilities, family, marital issues, child welfare issues, addiction issues, the elderly, vulnerable elderly. That's where we are throughout the Archdiocese. ShareLife raises the money, we allocate the funds. We also have a process that we refer to as membership review. So we monitor with our agents very closely how it is that they deliver the services in a Catholic nature.
Tell me about the creation of ShareLife and how that came about from that period and sort of transitioning into the new period.
The Catholic Charities agencies before ShareLife were members in Toronto of the United Way of Greater Toronto. It was Archbishop Phil Pocock in 1978 with the admission of Planned Parenthood into the United Way of Toronto, said we have no choice. You know, we want to be in the world and in dialogue with the world, but on some issues you have to draw a line and say we can't cross that line. And it was on a point of principle, on a point of life. And it was a culture of life decision. And I've read Archbishop Pocock's script, and I use it often in my ShareLife talks, where he said we have no choice but to withdraw. And what he did at that time was made a commitment in the Archdiocese to the outlying areas that everybody understand what we're doing. We're going to continue to find ways to fund our Catholic agencies, and we're going to establish a new Catholic presence through Catholic social services in some of the outlying areas of the Archdiocese. The Catholic agencies relied greatly on that funding, so this was a monumental shift to take this stand and say, well, we're taking this stand on principle, but we have to continue to find ways to respond to the vulnerable. And that was the commitment that this community made.
Thank you. Okay. Recently we had the opportunity to meet with Father Paul Lennon. He served as the Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Toronto from 1979 to 1983. Here's what he had to say.
My involvement began with a letter from Archbishop Pocock saying that he thought I should become the Assistant Director of Catholic Charities. Oh, I said. So it was a bit of a surprise. So it took a while to get around to getting used to it. And part of getting used to it was being interviewed by the School of Social Work in Toronto. One of the questions was, are you interested in casework, group work, or community organization? And so they asked me that at the interview, and I said, gee, I haven't had a chance really to reflect on that much, but I'll get it together by the time school starts in the fall. And they nodded, and they carried on with the interview and sent me home. And then somebody phoned the Archbishop and said, no, we don't want him. He's not interested. We need interested people. So the Archbishop had to swallow that, and find me another school. So they got this school in Washington, D.C. And during the summer, I remember I was by this time living in the cathedral, getting ready to pack up and go. And he saw me from the floor, and he looked out as I was walking up the stairs. He says, "How's it going with that application?" I said, "Well, it seems to be going pretty well." And he said, "Well, sound interested." So went on from there, and I guess I sounded interested enough. As for the importance of the Second Vatican Council, because I began about the time it was closing. I don't know exactly when Cardinal Carter started, but he was involved in this when he was involved in the council. The first thing he did was, he didn't appoint a priest. He asked the board of the Council of Catholic Charities to find a successor. And so they got a search committee, and they went out and they searched, and they found Doreen Cullen, a famous social worker. It indicated that the Catholic people were ready for this kind of shift, to lay people, to women getting a role. In terms of the social services, the people, the hurting people, the wounded people, it's embracing them when the rest of society tends to reject them. And not only the rest of society, when we become social workers, we're supposed to look in and find out where our rejection lies, where our prejudice is, to try and at least subdue the prejudice that's in us. I could go to John Vanier. He now says, it's not what I give them, it's what they give me. These mentally challenged adults that can't say much, but they are giving me something that I wish I had earlier in my life.
And that was Father Paul Lennon, the Executive Director of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Toronto from 1979 to 1983. So how do you, as Catholic Charities, respond to the changing needs of the community? Jack?
How we do it is by, first of all, we try at Catholic Charities to get a sense of the situation, the level of need, the emerging need in the communities through our agencies. And the agencies have identified two main areas, I think, that still remain a big issue. One is affordable housing, and the high level of homelessness in the Greater Toronto area. I think affordable housing doesn't sound like it's so integrated into the levels of poverty, which is the other issue that always comes up. But it is because without a stable environment within which to raise a family, you end up having a situation of instability which translates itself into young people who are find themselves in difficulty in very short order with police and in the community not really seeing any hope. Because when you're talking about hope, that's where it really begins.
Tell me about your Youth in Transition program.
Well, the Youth in Transition program is really handled, I think, exclusively or pretty much through Covenant House. And the whole idea there is young people need the tools to be able to deal with life in the community. And they need a period through which they can be mentored, they can be guided, they can find a safe place, a safe spot to be able to talk about the problems they're having and facing. Some of these young people have been in care for so long that they really haven't developed the kind of tools that we all take for granted to be able to live out in the world. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is they get to a certain point and then they're let go and they essentially fall off a cliff. And what happens here with Youth in Transition, which I think Covenant House does a splendid job of, there's no question about that, is they are able to shepherd these young people through up until, how old would they be?
24.
So that gives them a better chance, and in most cases gives them a full chance to be able to make it in the world and to be able to move on.
It seems like that's sort of the grassroots approach, but You also have an approach where you try to make systemic change, which is to bring voters up to a level of recognizing what they're, as a Catholic, that they should be concerned
the
about.
election guides,
Yeah,
yeah.
so tell me about the election guide and what you've done in terms of that initiative and why you did it.
Well, we did it simply because we feel there's a responsibility to make Catholics in particular in the Archdiocese aware of issues that are out there that they might not be aware of. And the issues that we highlighted are drawn from, again, our member agencies, what they say is important. I mean, the first issue, and it's all based on the whole sense of hope, life, the importance, the dignity of every human person, that undergirds the whole thing. Built on top of that, again, the last few times we have tried to focus the questions on homelessness and housing, on the high levels of poverty, and why people have to take an interest in talking to, whether it happens to be a provincial election, their MPP, or talking to their MP if it's a federal election, about the need to be responsible.
One thing I really like about the election guide is you have a report card. So you outline the issues and you say, how does your candidate stand with relation to these issues? And I think that that's like so useful.
And again, it works two ways. I mean, it's, in one sense, it may be something that people actually go to a town hall meeting and actually ask a candidate and tick off the boxes, so to speak. But it also might be, even if you're not able to do that or you're watching on television, you can do the same. Again, the idea was to make people more aware of how much a particular candidate may or may not be talking about these issues.
How do you maintain your Catholic identity? How are we different from regular social service?
Yeah, and I'm very careful always to say that we're not better than any other service, but we are unique. We are different. And we start from a different place. When you look across the table, if you're a social worker, you don't see a client. You see somebody that you've been called to serve, okay, because you're created in the image and likeness of God, and that's where we begin from. So that changes and transforms the relationship from where we begin. What we've said is that we're going to do more together differently. And that probably is the hallmark of what we do. We pull together, we look at ways that how we're going to transform that system, and I think we're going to do, we already are doing remarkable things every day, but I think we're going to be strong as we enter the next 100 years. The focus is on the person presenting at the front door. That child of God, we're all created that way. How do we respond together?
Tell me about your volunteers. I was reading one of your brochures and it says that you have, based on a low minimum wage of $10, they contribute about $2.5 million every year in labor. Like, it's an army.
It's astounding.
We couldn't do it without our volunteers.
It is truly a great gift to our Catholic community, because I think people understand, people of faith. It just isn't faith alone. It's the works that have to come with it, you know, and we see that demonstrated every day. So,
and wouldn't you say it isn't just the Volunteers for Catholic Charities itself? It's every agency, and they will all tell you the same thing, that without the volunteers, without these people giving of their time, and you've often mentioned these are some very highly skilled professionals in many cases.
And to that effect, one very senior guy the other night, we were in a volunteer meeting trying to determine where the allocations will go to the agencies next year, which is very difficult because we know there's great need how to make it go around.
Yeah.
But when we talked about this, he turned to me and said, so when you figured out this volunteer amount, that dollar rate, you worked it out at a low wage. I go, yeah, $10 an hour. He says, so all I'm worth is $10 an hour, and that is somebody in his practice probably $200, $300 an hour, right? But I mean, it's a good point. We tend to underestimate what that contribution is from a dollar point of view, but make no mistake, in terms of the hours and the quality goes in, you can't put a value on it in this world. You just can't.
It's a way of showing how much time they actually put in, but in fact, everyone, you could ask anyone, the amount of effort and energy that a lot of these people actually expend is way more valuable than any dollar amount that we could ever tag onto them.
I'd like to think that we're changing lives every day, and not just think it, I mean I know it because I hear the stories from our agencies. In a publication that we do, Catholic Charities Cares, there's a couple stories in there, but one in particular of a young mom who was pregnant, and was encouraged, to seek an abortion. And she said, no, I chose life. And she turned to our Rose of Sharon, and we have many agencies for young moms, one in each area of the Archdiocese.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, through the intervention of the Rose, she said, I want to be a good mom. I know I can do this. Not alone, but I can do it. And she continued her education. She finished high school. She was enrolling in community college. Well, she's in community college now. There's a greater likelihood for that mom to have a successful future and the child.
Yeah.
So it's where we come in doing that kind of stuff, and that's right across the board. If you help that mom, what's the spin-off effect that you can't measure? Well, the healthier baby, so less focus on the medical system, visits to the emergency ward, better birth weight, continued education, so not having to receive welfare. How do you get a handle on the contribution you've made and the spin-off effect, the larger effect to the culture? That's what we're struggling with now. How do we begin to do that, to tell that story to our Catholic population, certainly, but to also share with the rest of the world to say, hey, we've got something here. This is good. Let's make sure everybody understands it. It just isn't charity. There's a whole social investment here that's making us stronger as a community and helping people to grow up and to be contributing members of this community.
It's not a zero-sum game.
That's right.
For someone else to gain, it's not for us to lose.
No.
Exactly.
No, it isn't.
Exactly.
And I think there's always a tendency among the general public to say, well, these are all very nice agencies and aren't these nice people, but really, if they weren't around, it wouldn't make any difference. But what happens if you have a family that's in the process of disintegrating or potentially disintegrating and can't go to, say, Catholic Family Services, P.L. Dufferin, to get help, to get counseling? You end up with a family that ruptures and breaks. You end up with children that go into care. You end up with two people, and the court system, and so forth and so on. All that, it's almost like playing something backwards. If you go all the way back to the day when they actually walk into Catholic Family Services and end up being a family that's whole again and worked again, the value and the impact on society, when you talk about what the impact is incalculable.
We've had long waiting lists at the family agency. So what the agency said is we'd like to establish a walk-in clinic model. And the walk-in clinic allows 1 day a week or one afternoon and evening open intake. So anybody that's experiencing problems can come in and talk with a social worker for an hour or two. This has been tremendous. It's like a triage model that you would see in the health system. So people have come in. Some people just need to talk to somebody for an hour or two and things are okay. Other people, you realize how serious it is and we got to bump them up on the waiting list and see them right away.
Right.
So it's made a tremendous difference. And some of the feedback we've got from our priests in different parishes in the Archdiocese as well have said, this has saved somebody's life, and I don't say that lightly. There have been people that are so desperate, I can only imagine, that contemplated suicide, that desperate, but turned here, and then told their parish priest, that saved my life.
And it's such an essential part of the new evangelization. I mean, one of the big topics at the Synod on the new evangelization was the importance of family life. And how do we support it and nurture it through those difficult times. And this is such an amazing example of that.
I think that everything we do, to the most vulnerable in our community really speaks to love of neighbor, love of God in what we do. And I think, I try to keep it that simple. So whoever comes to our door, there's no judgment. We respond, we serve. And we think, by doing that, that demonstrates that love for neighbor and for God. So that is the new evangelization. And as you said, with the family, it's the focus on family, the bedrock of that. Strong families make strong communities. Okay, we see that in our parishes and our parish life. We know that's where it is. So we have to reach out and bring people in to share with what we have, share that great gift.
So what can we expect in the future? What can we hope for?
Well, I think we need to get back to our roots and connect more with parishes, because we reached a professional phase where we didn't need parishes anymore, so there's this separation. I think there's great opportunity if we get back there, because then we're exploiting all of our gifts together.
Absolutely.
And I think about what we could do. So one of the things we'd like to do at Catholic Charities is engage our priests, our parishes in different areas of the Archdiocese and say, how can we make sure that we're reaching out to the most vulnerable in our community that maybe aren't as evident to us? Those that are shut in, those that are isolated, that those that we might not be seeing at Mass every week with us, but should be there. Often we get too comfortable in our church and we look around and everybody looks as we do. Well, there's a lot of other people out there that are suffering. And if we can reach out to them and bring them into the fold as well, it might make us a little uncomfortable at first, but I think that's where the answer are. We'll all be stronger and better for it.
Thank you so much for spending. We're out of time, but thank you so much for being with us today. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
I was speaking with Michael Fullan, the Executive Director of Catholic Charities, and Jack Panozzo, Program Manager of Social Justice and Advocacy. To find out more about Catholic Charities, visit their website at the address on the screen. And if you have any comments or questions about this episode, email us, focus@saltandlighttv.org. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.